And now a man who works out of a shed, sleeps in a full-size bed, and shaves his head, your host, Pete Dominic. All right, yeah, I am not as good as Pete Co, but he is out sick today. He called in sick. I gave him a lot of grief, of course. I'm very upset with him. I told him he better have a lot of really serious diseases for calling out on such short notice. You know, you got to treat your volunteer talent who you don't pay really poorly to keep them motivated and, you know, make them really want it. Thank you very much for joining me today. I've got a great guest joining me for about an hour-long conversation. It's Reason Magazine's Matt Welch, not Matt Walsh, Matt Welch, also one of the three co-hosts of the Fifth Column podcast, which is a huge hit. And he is, I don't know if he still calls himself a libertarian, but a very free-thinking, independent, smart, thoughtful guy who I love talking to. Don't always agree and want to have more conversations like the one that Matt and I have today. I think you're going to thoroughly enjoy my conversation with Matt Welch coming up. But first, I want to tell you what I think is the most important news story of the day. Invite you to tonight's subscriber-only stand-up happy hour hangout at 8 East. And briefly just tell you a fun story that happened last night that has a bit of a lesson or a potential thoughtful conversation that we can have about parenting and, I think, nepotism. Okay, here it is. Last night, my wife, Val, posted several photos of my daughter, Ava's senior class. She's a senior high school photo shoot. That's a thing a lot of seniors do in this community, apparently. They hire professional photographers to do a pro shoot. Listen, I think it's a great thing to do. It's a great way to celebrate their accomplishment, their transition. And this photographer was fantastic. I grabbed one of the shots that Val posted on Facebook that I liked the most. It was like her headshot that she wants to use for future potential work as an actress. And my primary intention was just to share a great picture of my kid and her perfect facial symmetry, bone structure, and professionally backlit hair that made her look as if she was an angel from heaven, and tag it with a little bit of a joke, which I did. It was great. But then one of the most respected and well-known actors in the entire world shared it with his 1 million followers. That's right. The Fonz, Henry Winkler, shared my tweet with Ava's headshot, which briefly read, "This is my daughter, Ava. She's almost 18 and ready to take on the world. Also, she'd love to act in your film or TV show," which is kind of like a tongue-in-cheek. It was her headshot, but also just a great shot. And there were a few people who were offended or upset or accused me, and I guess Henry Winkler, of nepotism, that I was somehow doing the work for her or giving her a job. And I think it's interesting because I think it's an interesting conversation to have about what you do for your kids. How much is too much? When are you enabling them? But nepotism, technically, the definition is the practice among those with power or influence of favoring relatives or friends, especially by giving them jobs. Like, say you were the president of the United States of America and you gave your daughter and her husband the most important jobs and clearances in the entire United States government. Now that, my friends, would be a perfect textbook example of nepotism. Now, in this case, I'm going to continue to try to open doors for my daughter. I mean, at least for Ava. I mean, my younger one, Julia, she's on her own, but I've created a life, a career's worth of connections and built relationships with people who I respect and who respect me. And if there's an opportunity where I can introduce my daughter to somebody, I'm going to do it. Then it is her job to get the job, to follow through if she gets the job, to take advantage of whatever opportunities, whatever doors open for her. I mean, my dad did that for me. My dad got me my first job working at a concession stand at the New York State Fair. And I got the most famous actor in the world to share my daughter's headshot. So, you know, you do what you can. But my dad made a call and got me a minimum wage job making popcorn at the State Fair in a cinder block room with no windows. He made a call. A friend of his hired me, and that was that. And I did a crappy job, and I don't even think I got hired back the next year. And I think it probably reflected poorly on my father's reputation, but the point is, you help your kids certain amount, right? I mean, you're paying for their college, you're paying for their health care, you're doing any number of things to help them out with the connections that you have. And I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Maybe you do. We'll talk about it at the Hangout tonight. And I think I'm going to bring Val on to talk about it with me and maybe some other parents and listeners as well. But it was an awesome thing. Also, Dave Rothkopf, who has a huge following on Twitter, also shared that tweet of Ava and her headshot, my tweet. So it was really cool, to say the least. And I want to talk about that idea further. It's a parenting thing, and I think it's worthy of discussion. So for all you haters out there who are jealous of my friendship with Henry Winkler and that he so generously shared that tweet and headshot of my daughter, I don't know what to tell you. Maybe just sit on it, Potsy. That I love that show, and it is so ridiculously cool that I've gotten to know Henry Winkler and that he shared that. I was blown away by it. I couldn't sleep. It was so exciting. I told Ava and Julia. I woke up Val, who was not happy. Not happy. Doesn't like to be woken up. Doesn't matter what it is. Even when Henry Winkler shares your daughter's headshot with everybody on Twitter, she still would have referred you. You didn't wake her up and told her in the morning. But enough about me, folks. My new thing here on the opening of the show is to mention a few stories, maybe play a few clips and tell an anecdote or two. Hopefully it's no more than really 15 minutes most of the time. Because I host a daily podcast, and I usually drop it around midnight, so I get the scoop, the lid of the news day, and it's pretty fresh when you wake up. I want it to be there for you. Like I said, let's not get addicted to the news. I'm not doing deep dives and news dumps. I just want to mention a few stories, and when possible, go a little in-depth on a story when I think it's important and there's some good context for it. And that is the case today. I'll tell you what that story is in a second, but first, President Biden headed to Florida as Hurricane Ian death topped about 115 was the highest number I saw, and everybody's making a big deal of it because it was Joe Biden and the Florida governor Ron DeSantis and their possible opponents in the 2024 election, and they were, I guess, being polite to each other. So there's a lot of talk around that. The governor of a state hit by a disaster working with the president of the United States. Always an interesting situation, especially when they're in different parties. I remember President Obama going to New Jersey and meeting with Chris Christie, and Chris Christie got criticized for giving Obama a hug. Remember that? All right, well, Amazon apparently suspended 50 workers at a unionized warehouse in Staten Island who refused to go back to work after a fire broke out inside the warehouse there. Workers said it was not safe to go back due to smoke and flooding. These suspensions occurred at the only unionized Amazon warehouse in the United States. This comes as the Amazon labor union is calling on the company to stop stalling and start negotiating with the union. And that got a lot of attention because it certainly seems like a bad thing to do. I don't know how bad this fire or flooding was, but that was a big story yesterday. And the Herschel Walker story took yet another crazy turn. The woman who claimed Herschel Walker paid for her abortion and who Herschel Walker in an interview said he doesn't know who that is, says they also have a child together. Again, Herschel Walker said he doesn't know the accuser. So weird because it's the mother of one of his kids. She spoke out to the Daily Beast, Roger Sullenberger, again. So that got crazy. And also Donald Trump gave a speech somewhere that invited him stupidly and apparently said someone once told him that if Abe Lincoln and George Washington came back to life and ran on a ticket together, they couldn't beat him. He said that. But no, the big story I've been teasing is that the oil cartel, the oil-producing nations, OPEC and Russia, decided today to cut oil supplies directly and immediately. And Michael McFaul tweeted on Twitter that will assist Putin's war effort. And he says they were not compelled to do so. They chose to do so. Don't ever forget it. Let's go to NBC Nightly News correspondent Emily Incada, who has a good report that's under 2 minutes.
After a year of tumultuous gas prices, signs today pain at the pump could worsen as some of the world's top oil producers, including Saudi Arabia and Russia, promise deep cuts to output. OPEC Plus announced it will slash production by 2 million barrels per day to spur a recovery in crude prices. The White House today calling the decision short-sighted.
We are providing security, stability to the energy markets.
The move defying an aggressive push from President Biden to keep fuel flowing, even visiting Saudi Arabia this summer to convince them to increase oil production. With midterms just weeks away, higher energy prices could be a blow to Democrats and undo months of steadily dropping costs at the pump in most areas of the country.
Talk to me about the timing of the cuts.
The barrels that are going to be cut will be cut in November. But what it means also is higher prices for drivers, higher prices for heating, higher prices for holiday travel.
In parts of California, gas prices are already topping $7 a gallon.
I got to go to where I'm going, so I got to pay it, but I'm not happy about it.
And across the country in Massachusetts, Scott McFarlane has been in the heating oil business for more than 50 years. He says customers should be prepared to pay more as temperatures there fall.
The timing is awful for us. It's going to be a tough winter for everybody, the consumers and anybody in business. Adding
insult to injury for families already struggling with soaring inflation.
Oh, man, that is just not great news. And I've been reading a lot about that and watching and listening to a lot of reporting on it, and will be in the next couple of days, probably bring somebody on to talk about it. What are your questions? What are your concerns? What are your thoughts about that big story? Let's stay at the NBC family. This is CNBC energy reporter Hadley Gamble, who actually asked questions to Saudi Arabia's energy minister. Worth watching that. But here she is with United States Senator from Connecticut, Chris Murphy, talking about this issue and the Saudis.
Because I'll be in Vienna tomorrow meeting with OPEC Plus. They're anticipating a cut potentially of as much as basically 1 million barrels a day. And there are a lot of worries, frankly, about what that could do to energy prices in this part of the world. Do you think that's a mistake on their part?
I think it is a mistake on their part. And I think it's time for a wholesale reevaluation of the U.S. alliance with Saudi Arabia. What's the point of looking the other way as the Saudis chop up journalists, repress political speech inside Saudi Arabia if, when the chips are down, the Saudis effectively choose the Russians instead of the United States? We've been very clear with them. We need them right now, right? We need them to take some steps that, may affect their short-term bottom line when it comes to oil revenues, but allow the Western alliance to survive this challenge from Russia. And it seems that either the Saudis aren't willing to stand with us or have to be pushed really hard to stand with us. And I just don't know what the point of the current alliance is if we have to work so hard to get the Saudis to do the right thing.
All right, Scott Murphy on CNBC with reporter Hadley Gamble, whose reporting is worth digging into. And finally on this, I think the best take came from another rant from comedian Trey Crowder, and here it is.
Well, OPEC has announced they're cutting oil production by 2 million barrels a day, which will lead to higher gas prices. News that is surely to be met with reasoned sensibility by the American public. Now, I think we all know that one has to merely open the front door and whisper the words, higher gas prices, upon the wind, and suddenly a frothing, beat-faced eagle person will appear upon your doorstep to flail in an impotent rage. They're very upset. I assume they've already started ordering more of those Biden I did that gas pump stickers. Probably going to have to replace a lot of them, because I assume they spent the last few months scraping them off after they realized that during that time frame they featured Joe Biden taking credit for significantly lower gas prices. Yeah, I can't believe that a lack of foresight led to comical unintended consequences for one of their cartoonishly immature propaganda campaigns, but here we are. But nobody's happy about this, and it almost seems like there was going to be one part where the left and right agreed on this issue. People on the right are like, wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have this dependence on foreign oil at all? And the left's like, yeah, it would. That's why we need a Green New Deal and alternatives for clean, renewable energy sources, correct? And they're like, what? No, that's why we need to drill in the Indians' yards like the good Lord intended. What are you talking about? In these instances, they default straight to drill, baby, drill every time because, as we've already alluded to, Republicans and long-term consequences go together like oil and water for our grandchildren to drink. I feel like if you tried to force them to offer solutions to the fact that eventually we will run out of oil anyway, they'd start pitching things like, okay, how about this? Y'all seen Jurassic Park? All right, so we do that. We skip the park part, though. We just clone them, kill them, turn them straight into oil. What do you think? We do something like that? It's like, Jesus Christ, how gay do y'all think solar panels are? My goodness, this is something that's going to have to happen eventually, and the longer we wait, the harder it's going to be. But good luck getting them to care about anything but the cost of the go-go juice in their boom-boom wagon. And then there's the whole aspect of it where they're like, Donald Trump wouldn't let this happen. Maybe not, because of how he was always bending over backwards for the Saudis and Russians and every other authoritarian regime he wanted so desperately for this country to emulate. Maybe y'all long for the day where this is the type of country where women are brutally repressed in broad daylight and journalists are hurled from windows for speaking the truth. But as far as I'm concerned, avoiding that outcome is worth an extra $1 or $2 per gallon.
Trey Crowder, everybody. Go see him live, TreyCrowder.com, and follow and support him on Twitter. I got to get him back on the show. Really, really funny guy. All right. Well, that's all I've got for you. I think that's a big news story, and I wanted to give you a few different takes on it, and as much news because I think that's pretty much the most impactful story out there from the last 48 hours, this first week of October in 2022, with just 32 days until the midterm elections. 26 days till Halloween, and 81 days until Christmas, folks. And now it's time to get to today's very special guest. Matt Welch is one of the hosts of the Fifth Column podcast. He is a blogger, a journalist, and an author. Go to wethefifth.substack.com to subscribe to their podcast. Like I said, editor-at-large, or did I say editor-at-large at Reason Magazine. You've seen him on Real Time with Bill Maher several times. He used to be a regular on the old SiriusXM show, and I think this is only his second time on the podcast, so I was very happy to have him back. He's on Twitter at Matt Welch, and I think more than once, maybe even 3 times, I referred to his podcast, The Fifth Column, as The Fifth Element, which is a Bruce Willis movie from like the 90s or something. And I'm really embarrassed about that. He called me on it at the end, and it was brilliant and perfect, just as I expected him to. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Matt Welch, let's do it. Well, there he is, ladies and gentlemen. I've just told you all about him, and many of you have really insulted him, not knowing that he is not, in fact, Matt Walsh. And the amount of listeners that say to me, oh, your pal's a real asshole, that I have to correct must pale in comparison to how often you directly get confused. I want to believe that's not true, but thank you for joining me. And how often do you get confused with right-wing Christian nationalist Matt Walsh?
So, as a matter of fact, I think it was about 4 or 5 days ago, I was made aware that there's you have a longtime listener who has always been mad at you for having Matt Walsh on your program. And he only, I presume it's a he, only recently became aware of his classification mistake and felt a sense of public anguish about it. And I issue a preemptive absolution of anybody making the problem. It only really happens about once a week where I'll get tagged into like some kind of, how do you define a girl, Matt Welch? I'm like, I don't know, dude. Not really fresh in mind right now. But I just tell people I think you have the wrong person and go on with my life.
Well, I'm very happy to see you and have you here. And I've been listening to your podcast a lot and I love it. I get a lot of different points of view that I haven't heard. I often don't agree with and reach out to Moynihan too. And I was like, hey man, I'd love to talk to you because I want to hear more what you think or flesh certain things out. So there's that. The podcast is so great. It's doing so great, I know. And also thank you publicly for being super helpful with your advice to me, which you took a ton of time to be helpful. And you've always been such a cool guy, egoless, regardless of how well you're doing. And I think that's a real testament to your character. And I want to say it to your goddamn face.
Well, thank you. That's nice. You've been incredibly gracious. I got a big foot in the door at SiriusXM. Because of you, but also, good people doing good things in the world need as much bro outs and cis outs as possible.
Your appearances, for example, big time, Matt Welch, your appearances on Real Time, which I don't know how many times you've done it, but you just did it a few weeks ago. And they fly out there first class. They put you up at this Beverly Hills hotel, at least as long as anything hasn't changed from 2018 when I did the show once. Kind of bombed. I was very angry. And you kick ass. You do you're so good on that show. And I really enjoyed it. And yet you still talk to those of us who are no longer in corporate media and do podcasts from our shed. So I appreciate that.
I've just been real fortunate with them. I've gone on about a dozen times now.
Wow. And son of a bitch.
I just say that to make you feel bad, as you know.
I'm supposed to hate the show as a progressive, and I really don't love Maher, but I don't hate the show. I hate a lot of what he says. I think he's way wrong, but man, I like the format of that show. I like the monologue. I like things that he does.
I tell this to Bill, and you can well expect that I have my disagreements with Bill. But I have told him many times, and his former producer, Scott Carter, who's just a lovely man who's now moved on. He's producing Killer Mike, and some other stuff, for, I think, HBO and related properties. But, they created a template in the 90s, which is a kind of landscape that I think you and I have been working on, regardless of ideology, of like, what would it be like if people talked about political things, but in a normal way, as you might do in a bar, and also in a way that not everybody is a completely pre-cooked, ideological or partisan team member. And we can let's pull in a comedian here and a rapper there and whatever, and be able to have a kind of thoroughgoing and hopefully kind of funny conversation. That's what I've been trying to do in my dumb way, with a TV show that we had with Kennedy and Camille Foster on Fox Business called The Independents, and with the Fifth Column podcast, and just sort of a generalized approach. And it's strange to me how seemingly rare that still is. I think that, like, part of the growth of sort of the podcast universe is a bit of that ethic more than what we normally see in kind of over professionalized media. And it's a continued puzzlement for me that that traditional outlets don't understand what the secret ingredient is to get there.
That's so interesting the way you put it. Over professionalized media. I just got a text from a very well-known, very popular anchor friend of mine at CNN. I used to work there 10 years ago. And she's like, would you come on and do midterm, panels on midterm coverage? And I was like, hell yeah, I would. But then I was like, it's so, and you just give me the word, over professionalized CNN. Like, I'll kind of go anywhere. I don't have huge issues with going places, as long as they're not going to edit me or, be a dick. But in this case, like, CNN is very over professionalized. It seemed like I was thinking about it. I was like, I'm not sure I fit in there, or even MSNBC. I mean, we used to do this great show with David Gurrow with this panel, but it's like, have a misfit. Don't wear a tie. Say things in such a way that aren't so, I don't know. You use that word over professionalized. I would use it kind of corporate or safe. But I don't know if you could expand a little bit more specifically on the kind of panels we're seeing on the cable news, certainly CNN and MSNBC, I would argue, which often have a lot of brilliant people. I'm not saying they are, but like, loosen up.
And also open up, there's a thing like about 8 months ago, Melissa Harris Perry, whose weekend show. I'm glad you mentioned David Gurrow. MSNBC used to have a lot of interesting weekend shows where you'd sit on more or less for the full hour or something with 2 or 3 other guests. Maybe a couple would rotate in or out. And you would have a pretty thoroughgoing conversation. Could be about philosophy, could be about this. And it was understood that people would be coming from a different perspective and maybe just, eating the donut together, whatever they were doing. Melissa Harris Perry was a bit of a pioneer in that. Certainly was a pioneer in the way, because this is pre 2014. This is like, I think her show started around 2010 or 2011. 2014 being sort of the summer of Ferguson, where there was a lot of kind of a beginning of a national conversation about race and policing and some other things. But she was having explicit conversations about race, and also just bringing in a lot of faces and voices who you otherwise would not see represented on television. It wasn't just a question of representation either. It was like, holy shit, Jelani Cobb is fire. I want to see more of this guy, right? She was bringing in some really good people, and I was happy to be on there. She used to love to have me on, not just as someone who came from a very different point of view ideologically, but she would also, in the kind of Bill Maher thing, you'd have one segment about the difference between positive and negative rights philosophically, which is a fascinating question. And the next segment, which she would always love to have me on, would be about black women's hair. And she'd be like, okay, white dude, what do you say about that? And I love that because it's fun to roll like that. And she came, so about 6-8 months ago, someone rediscovered one of these promo ads that she had made for her show. You know, Missy does these kind of awful things, or used to, with like Rachel Maddow at the Hoover Dam, and we used to build things. Yeah, terrible.
Chris Hayes at his bicycle, I think. Alfred used to always love to make fun of that. Yeah,
poor Chris. So her one took a snippet of a thing that she did about education, where she said, your kids don't belong to you; they belong to society, and that was at the time a cause of a huge sort of outrage on the right. Of like, this is exactly the mindset of progressives and lefties that is the problem. And so this was rediscovered, this promo, earlier this year. And I'm sorry for this long wind up, but it kind of gets to your question, I hope. And people like, can't believe this. They just sort of rediscovered it. And then she's terrible and it's terrible and MSNBC is terrible. And I said, look, let me use this as an opportunity to talk about why she's not terrible, why her show and that format, which has vanished mostly from cable news, much to my chagrin, was not terrible. And I went in and described one of the things that she did when that thing happened at the time, which is 7-8 years ago, maybe longer. After the thing, she invited me on to criticize her. She's like, okay, people are mad at me. Can you explain to me why? Great. And I said, yes. And I did this in a way that I would describe as both loving and also just real. Like, this is why and this is how. And we had a great conversation about it. And I re-mentioned this in 2022 because she facilitated those types of conversations. And what we have now instead of that is this kind of Twitter, I have found you at your worst moment world. I'm going to strip that out of all context. I'm going to put it out and put you on blast while kind of erasing all of the finer distinctions and nuances of your conversation. I miss that cable world from 8-9 years ago, the MSNBC world, and it doesn't exist anymore.
My only thought about it is, you mentioned David Gura's panel, and I love that guy. He's one of the classiest guys I met. And I love Ali Velshi as well, who replaced him in the time slot, which was awkward because everybody loves Ali, and Ali didn't ask for that, wasn't going for it, certainly wasn't trying to kill Gura's show. He had his own show before that anyway, in a time slot. The point I'm trying to make is, with corporate media, you got to have a lot of people watching to be able to get good ad prices. That's it. It's the same thing now with us in terms of our independent media. But in this case, you can have a lot of subscribers, and a lot of subscribers who pay could add up to a really significant way to make your living. But it's not nearly the amount of viewers that corporate media needs to make their operations run. And I wonder what you think about how much that's changed, given the fact that you guys are doing really well with The Fifth Element. And it's based on mostly, as far as I can tell, subscriptions, people paying for your Substack now, where you guys are at. You were at Patreon. We talked about that. And versus the amount, you don't have probably as many, maybe you do, listeners as, a certain MSNBC hour or network hour, I would imagine. But you guys are doing way better than you would if you were the on-air anchor or host or even producer at a corporate media outlet. And I think that's changing the game for good and bad, I think.
Yes. And it's kind of an open question about that. I mean, first of all, yes, there is on cable news, there is a kind of a flight towards, yes, you want to make your money by having a large audience, but they also acknowledge that they're not going to have a large audience with some exceptions. So they've kind of sorted themselves so that, because the biggest source of money in this are political ads. So they make all their money in presidential years, and they'll make some money this fall. And it helps to have an ideological positioning there, which is one of the reasons why CNN is going through such an identity crisis. Can't figure out how to navigate that. They can't just be resistance CNN or whatever the post-Trump resistance kind of category would describe itself. MSNBC gets this, Fox gets this. So where do they go? So sometimes they can make money by losing audience if they organize their audience in such a way that is easier to sell ads to. But that's put that aside for a second. We get right now, we probably get the Fifth Column podcast pretty close to the listenership as we got viewership when Camille and Kennedy and I were doing a show on Fox Business Network. Not one of the big ones. Fox Business gets a lot less, but still.
But still, the overhead for that Fox Business, that 1 hour, that overhead for that 1 hour versus the overhead for what you're doing, if it's equal to or even just a little less than, much less a little more than, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, in one sense, it is, I think, a very, very healthy competition in most senses. I've always been, I've been participating in the creation of new media things my entire life.
Yeah, that's why you're a great person
when I was 22, and I've started a lot of things, and most things fail, but it's fun to play with, and new technology enables all of that. I think that what it does is, among other things, it rewards a certain kind of free speech, like actually stuff spoken freely. That's how I intend that. And kind of independence of mind. It demonstrates that there's a market and rewards people who do that well. That's useful. It's a useful lesson for legacy media to have themselves. They can't learn that lesson to save their lives. I don't know how big Joe Rogan has to get before they realize there's an audience for something that's a little bit different than what and how they do it. And that's not a blanket endorsement of Joe Rogan at all. But like that sort of free flowing conversation.
Well, a better example might be Gutfeld's Hour. I mean, CNN could do that in their own way, in their own respectable way, with, frankly, people like you and me, and we could name 10 other women or gay people or black people, whatever, they could do in 11 o'clock. They could do those kind of things.
I don't know. I mean, that might be opening up another whole can of worms, but I don't think left of center political comedy has been a very fruitful place on television in the Trump era, just because. And I think the key moment was, you're talking about the Colbert Report, was when he was kind of tanking in the ratings, and early in the Trump era, just sort of like made this strong pivot to, okay, we're just going to do Trump, an anti-Trump roast every single night. And he rebounded. And so much of comedy has not been, at least to my taste, very interesting, the sort of political based comedy since then. And that's kind of a problem.
But what I meant, and I totally agree with you if that's what I meant. But like when I meant like CNN's way, I mean what I actually mean is like strike the word comedy, and you just don't have a stuffy guy in a suit with a panelist made up of Washington Post and former Democratic strategists. You have You have someone like me, and you don't even need to make jokes. Whatever, wearing whatever, or any number of people. Forget me. I don't want to do that kind of work anymore. I love my shed. But like someone younger, someone that just does a show that's just not as buttoned up. I mean, comedy, whatever. Greg is definitely doing comedy. He's got a lot of comedians on that show. So,
right, but also they smuggle in plenty of content. Kat Timp, who's a good friend, is on there every night. And
mostly it's that, I think, probably, but there's a ton of it's whatever. I mean, the point is,
it allows for just to throw an example. Kat last week, I think it was, did a 15-minute, basically, a monologue segment about fentanyl policy, and it was actually super libertarian, and maybe you would disagree with it too. But like, just to say that on Fox for 15 minutes, there was an absolutely pushing back against right-wing hysteria about drugs on a libertarian-ish show, or from a point of view on a kind of comedy. It loosens up the space, right? Yeah. That in the best way. Like Maher on his best day, even to this day, will loosen up space for conversations that people for whatever reason feel a little bit to be either taboo or just like, I don't want to go there or whatever. He goes there. He's wrong sometimes. And I'm sure you might think that he's wrong more than I might think he's wrong. But I certainly think he's wrong many times. But the conversation thing and people still value him for that and value that program and venue for it. And it is a curiosity. Maybe there's a limited supply of people who are good at it. But I think it's more that legacy media institutions are kind of scared by that as a concept and don't know how to replicate it. They know how to basically learn from the early success of Fox News, which was a business success of like, okay, if you don't have correspondence everywhere and you just have people sitting around a table yelling at each other, it costs much less to produce, and it could be very entertaining and very useful for certain segment of the population. And in a way, kind of sadly, MSNBC and CNN in their ways, mimicking that as a kind of business proposition, has led to, one, the eradication of CNN and to some degree MSNBC, which has this great news apparatus behind them. NBC News is a very serious apparatus.
Yeah,
but
they have major resources all over the country and world.
Yes, and they don't utilize that, especially in the prime time, but increasingly in daytime. They don't use that for the purposes of good as much anymore. And I think that's a damn tootin' shame, Pete Dominic.
Well, it's about making back to my original point about how much money do you need to make to keep your operation going, and when you have to pay rent in Rockefeller Center and all the technical
stuff, wires, the coming down from the ceiling there,
all the wires, the people. I mean, the from the makeup artists to those operating cameras and producers, it's millions and millions of dollars. Meanwhile, you can go listen to The Fifth Element and pay $5, and you guys.
And you can also listen for free.
And you can also listen for free. But I'm saying, I mean, obviously, same thing here. But you see the point I'm trying to make, and what that's obviously changing. Let me ask you about some of the issues, though. Let me ask you about some of the things that you guys have been talking about, that the world's talking about. You and I haven't talked in a long time. How do you see basically what's gone on in American politics, in the American divide over the past couple of years? Maybe if I wanted to pick a point, I've heard you guys talk a lot about the insurrection, January 6th. Whatever, the coup, I don't know what language I think sometimes we get hung up on the language, which is okay. We should. And you guys do a good job of giving different definitions of things. But where do you think we've gone since January 6th, the investigation, politics, up in the last 2 years to where we're at here with this midterm elections? How do you frame it, Matt Welch?
I think that the kind of elephant in the room of American politics is one, and this is where I will be in kind of strange, perhaps, agreement with a lot of people on the left. Like, I think the January 6th riot, Capitol Hill riot, I'll call it that, at least, and attempt by Donald Trump to pull every lever, both available and in his lawyers' minds, to delay or reverse certifying the election. It is astonishing to me to this day how many Republicans later on January 6th voted not to certify the election. Yeah, it was like 140 I think was the number. If I get that wrong, sorry.
How do you refer to them? You're about to explain, but specifically, how do you think of those that are still in Congress that might get reelected, or those who ran on denying the outcome of the election that might get elected? How do you?
I mean, the ones who run on denying it are election results deniers. I mean, there's no other way to put it. They're also either cowards or insane people. And I tried not to get people sorted like that, but there are people who don't believe, because they are not, that, blinkered or fervent. They don't actually believe that the election was stolen. They don't believe what Donald Trump said, but yet they looked at the incentive structure on the conservative and Republican base side, and they made to themselves rational judgment to not cross them or to throw them enough of a bone and this kind of thing. I have a withering contempt for those people, the Josh Hawleys of the world. No, I mean, words can't describe you in the face of being ransacked by people. And of course it wasn't everybody, but it was fucking enough. And in the face of that obvious pressure attempt, whipped up by a conspiracy theorist, would-be authoritarian president, it's to do anything except for to certify the election is gross. My biggest worry right now, to answer the beginning of your question, is the elections of people in potential positions of authority over the interpretation of election results. So this is going to be governors in some places like Mastriano in Pennsylvania. It's going to be secretaries of state in places like Michigan. People who are running for those positions and running very explicitly, or at least at the beginning in primary elections, of saying, Trump got jobbed and we're going to fix that. That is the location of the problem. That, and also of that problem. That, and also, there's a federal bill about cleaning up the Election Count Act, and I'm blanking on the names in front of me, but it's a bipartisan bill that could have been and should have been front-loaded in this Congress. And right now, the last I saw, they were going to wait until after the election, probably do a lame duck thing after November. But like there are specific fixes to the specific areas of threat that can and should be done, and I wish that everybody from President Biden on down were laser focused on those things, those sort of weak points, and not conflating otherwise normal Republican stuff that you can disagree with and will always disagree with as being part of that thing. Biden's been going on about MAGA Republicans and MAGA this and MAGA that, and saying, well, the problem with MAGA is that they want to defund Social Security. It's not the fucking problem with MAGA. It's just not.
Well, he's also
there are going to be people who are self-identified as MAGA who want to put sunsetting language on Social Security. Rick Scott in Florida does that for sure. So, okay, that's Rick Scott. But to identify what are the unique attributes of Trump world in general, and then ones that are actually a threat, going threat right now, MAGA as a unit compared to other blocks of traditional Republicans are less likely to defund or, to sunset Social Security. That's not, Donald Trump ran against Paul Ryan. There was a war for the soul of an ideological war for the soul of the Republican Party, and Trump won and Ryan lost. The things that MAGA does that is bad is specifically, pushing against the rule of law about elections. That should be where the focus goes to, both legislatively and as sort of like this is the politician that we want to bounce out, not someone who's.
I totally agree with you, but I feel like I disagree with what's happened, and I could be wrong here, but I thought the only reason why we haven't passed more reforms in this era during this Congress with this president is because of the Senate. Like there's nothing, I feel like there's nothing more than Biden could do. The House Democrats passed it. They can't get these reforms that you're suggesting be passed because of Republicans in the Senate. I thought
in this particular case, this is Susan Collins said that she wanted to do it. It was Chuck Schumer who tabled it until after the election in this particular case. So it's going to be too complicated as an issue to do. We'll wait until after the election. Maybe Mitch McConnell will be more active. But this could have been a front burnered election reform, and it is not. It has been chosen not to, and it's not because of Mitch McConnell dragging his feet. In this case, in plenty of other cases, I'm sure that is true. But in this case, as far as I know, and I'll happy to be corrected if I'm wrong, but the last time I looked at it seriously, which is about a month ago, it was a proactive decision by Democrats, not Republicans, to say, let's not do this until after
I don't know how much
November.
more credit you can give them than passing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And did they not vote on it? I'm looking at the wrong thing.
The John Lewis, the one that I'm talking about, it's a bipartisan. Susan Collins' name is on it. I think it's the Election Count Reform Act. Anyways, we don't need to overly weeds it, but Biden didn't mention the thing at all in his big MAGA speech, and I think you do mention it in the MAGA speech, and you don't mention abortion. Abortion is a huge and very important issue. It is not the unique thing about MAGA Republicans that needs to be stopped. And if anything, I mean, I think abortion, you're talking about like what does it look like here? I mean, I think pro-life, anti-choice, however you want to put it, conservatives are the dog that caught the car with the Dobbs decision. Like people woke up and didn't realize that there were existing laws, really draconian laws on the books in 20 states. And even people who describe themselves as pro-life don't like those laws, as we saw in Kansas. And so I think that there was a kind of an inevitable pendulum swing in American politics in midterm elections, and the Dobbs thing stopped the pendulum from swinging at that moment. There are a lot of other factors in the current moment that could look bad for Democrats or good for Democrats, Republicans, or whatever, but certainly abortion threw that in that mix. But I think you, as a party and as a president, to the extent to which you are raising a 5-alarm fire signal about the unique anti sort of democratic with a small d things in the election, I think you have to be able to separate those issues out to demonstrate how serious indeed you are about them.
I love talking to you. I've missed talking to you, Matt. And I certainly love listening to you on the podcast and watching you on real time. And one thing you said on the Fifth Element podcast, which I was like, oh, I got to ask Matt about this. I really got to. You said something like, this is like maybe a month ago, talking about Biden's speech that got so heavily criticized, and you guys were criticizing it, and talking about the language and fascism, or is it, semi-fascism or MAGA Republicans or whatever you want to say. But you said something like criticizing the historians that went to the White House. And I think this is where we need to really be talking. And I have been a lot with a lot of experts, and I'm wondering who you're talking to or talking about, because when it comes to the history of fascism and democracy in Europe and America and the West, wherever you want to talk about, there's obviously been millions and millions of books written about it. And I'm wondering, what you see differently in terms of history, or what you think historians are getting wrong when it comes to whatever you want to pick. But specifically, I think fascism. And I heard in your most recent episode, you guys basically criticizing folks who are saying the new Italian prime minister is fascist. And, right. And I wonder what your view is, or what historians you criticize, or what history you disagree with, because there's a lot of different interpretations, obviously.
So,
do you know what I'm talking about? Sorry for putting you on the spot.
No,
okay.
It's fine. I will cede at CEDE, fascism expertise to my colleague Michael Moynihan, has more books about fascism on his wall. I mean, he would be, if the child services ever saw his bookshelves, they would rightly just take him in handcuffs. I have some experience in Europe in communism and post-communism. Levels of authoritarianism. I see a lot of discussion about Viktor Orban. I lived in Hungary for 3 years.
Yeah, you lived there for a long time, which I think brings.
And he's routinely described as fascist or semi-fascist, and he's not. And I could go
Viktor
on all
Orban
day. Viktor Orban
defender Matt Welch joining me now.
I hate Viktor Orban.
Sounds like you want to KSSING him.
I don't. I want to use accurate language to describe things that are in front of our face, and that puts me at odds with people constantly.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell us what. The Orban.
I mean, fascism in every context involves the use of violence to achieve political goals in an organized and big way, and we haven't seen that yet. We saw an attempted use of some violence on January 6th for sure. It is a failed attempt. We've definitely bent the system, for lack of a better word, in America, and it's straining, and it doesn't help that there are people being attracted to and want to join and participate in the system who have crazy ideas. But so far, I mean, Donald Trump loses every time he goes into court, trying to do the craziest of the things that he wants to do. So in the case of the historians, I'm specifically thinking about Michael Beschloss, right? Very good historian. Mm-hmm. There's a great piece in Political Magazine about him from about a month and a half ago. I think it was in August, that talked about kind of the pop degeneracy of Michael Beschloss's public persona.
The radicalization of Washington's most famous historian. Michael Beschloss is still neutral about everything except the biggest issue of it all. I think this is what you're talking about by Michael Schaefer.
Yes, and so my issue with him, there are incentive structures. I wrote a piece for Reason a week and a half or two or so about the kind of eternal recurrence of political grift, how there's this gigantic economy and reward system, and it goes to media too. Media is definitely part of this, where there are incentive structures to exaggerate, hyperbolize, and catastrophize perceived enemies. Right now, Michael Beschloss is absolutely leaning into that incentive structure in the way that he is talking about stuff on Twitter, in the way that he is talking on MSNBC, and in the way that he's whispering into Biden's ear. I say this as someone who's probably recommend William Shirer's The Collapse of the Third Republic more than any living person, because I'm probably the only person who read it, or at least remembers reading it, which is all about the history of mostly interwar France, or France collapsing like a cheap tent in 1940 to the Germans, And it's an examination from someone who lived in France for large chunks of the 20s and 30s. Like, how did the rot in French culture and society and its political institutions affect the way that it absolutely just sort of collapsed in the face of the Nazi threat, which there's immediately a lot of collaborators with in France. I'm fascinated with the flight away from faith in basic liberalism and in sort of democratic capitalism that happened in the 1930s all over England and stuff. George Orwell, who was largely spent his whole career trying to be right and like being meta conscious of it, had abandoned like democracy was just not going to work for him. It's either going to be socialism or fascism. He was wrong about that. But a lot of people, if he was wrong about that, imagine how many people were actually wrong about that. So I am fascinated with this as a topic. I'm worried about it as a cultural moment. I think we're in a long populist moment on the left and on the right in different ways that are not perfectly symmetrical in the entire world right now. This is an alienation that people are feeling. There's a reaction to it. And populism is just bad for almost everything that I believe in and agree with and want to see happen. And so there are echoes of that absolutely in the 20s and 30s. It doesn't mean that those echoes are by definition fascist. The Italian new prime minister, she's weird. She talks super fast. I don't like what she says about global bankers at all. That sounds really creepy and ugly. And at the same time, that's not fascist. She's, she's in a minority government. It'll probably collapse within 2 years, like every Italian government. She's not going to, I don't think, use violence to overthrow elections and stage some kind of coup. Like, all of these things are not on the table. The things that are on the table where there's actual authoritarianism tend to be on the continent of Europe, tend to be in places like Russia or in the near abroad or of Belarus. Even Viktor Orban, again, who is rightly a pariah in Europe and is a very bad actor and a corrupt, authoritarian-leaning person, is not a fascist. He's a recognizable character. And what has been shocking to me to discover since 2015, since the first time I was wrong about Donald Trump, is that style of European politics, you might call it pro-welfare state xenophobia, nationalism, and anti-multilateralism. Just throw a bunch of words out there, but like National Front style politics, in the French sense, I didn't think that would ever be popular in America. It is. And that is an absolute problem. I don't think that calling it incipient fascism gets you closer to it. I think that people strain towards using the fascist label to try to shut down arguments and conversations, to try to label their political opponents as irredeemable threats. The problem with crying wolf is that occasionally you're going to get a wolf. And we do have a wolf, but if you've been calling the wolf fascist the entire time, people are going to start to zone out a little bit, and that's a problem. I want to use the words that are in front of us that are more accurate, and I think that the incentive structures that Michael Beschloss has felt and tasted and boosted his career, and there's plenty of others like that who have gone on the MSNBC circuit, I don't think that they are helping. They think that they are helping, and they're raising the alarm to fight. I disagree with them, and they probably think I'm terrible.
Let's say I agree with you on the terminology around fascist or fascism, whether it be in Italy or America. I don't think I do, but let's say I do, because let's say I'm not as concerned about the kind of labels, although authoritarian is a pretty distinct and explanatory label, certainly more than fascist, which most people probably don't really understand what that means. And obviously it's different then than now, or here than there. But authoritarianism and Christian nationalism are the two I'm most scared about, and anti-democracy in this country. So what I want to ask you is, whether I call it fascism or authoritarianism, why, Welch, are you splitting hairs? They're both super bad, scary, dangerous, and I think you don't agree with the word dangerous. I think I heard you say you don't agree with the word dangerous.
No.
Okay.
I think I see dangers all around me. I see dangers.
What are the non-political dangers that you, like, what happened this morning? Is it your colon?
It's 20 murders in the subways in the last 2.5 years, kind of starting to get me down a little bit, considering my 14-year-old rides the subway.
Are you worried about violent crime in New York City?
Yeah, sure.
As a New Yorker,
sure.
I keep hearing people say that it's not nearly as bad as it was when I lived there in the late 90s, or they say it's not as bad as people are saying. But you're someone who is definitely concerned about it.
Well, I think when you're going to if you keep playing the card, well, it's not as bad as 1993.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, motherfucker. I remember I remember 1990 when there's, I think, 2,400 murders in New York. I was here in the summers at California for the first time. And, all I knew about New York was, the documentaries Escape from New York and Warriors and everything else. And I come in and, oh my God, it was absolutely frightening. People are getting beheaded in Tompkins Square when I was here. It was horrific. So yes, it's better since then. There's a long, national and New Yorkical decline in crime that happened for a long time, and that seems to be kind of over in some places, and New York is part of that some places, and it's worrying because I live here. It's fine to be worried about the place that you live.
Another time. I'm really interested in your perspective and your concerns for your son, but
and
to
daughter too.
And who?
It's my daughter, my son. My son, if I had one, could fend for his damn self, but my daughter is a shrinking violet 14-year-old.
Oh, why did I say your son just now? I don't know. I thought you said son. I was like, I didn't think you had a son.
Are you dead naming my daughter again? I've told you about this repeatedly.
To my point about splitting the hair on terminology, isn't dangerous, isn't bad, isn't authoritarianism and a shift to Christian nationalism, which is my favorite. I like that one the most to describe what's going on in America. Tell me why I'm wrong if you disagree with any of that.
I just don't know if you're right. I won't tell you why you're wrong. All right. But I'm not persuaded. I mean, some people can be described as Christian nationalists. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene, to the extent that I know anything about her, probably falls in that category.
The Republican base. No,
some of the. I mean, is it Christian? Is it like people waking up? I mean, part of the weird thing about the Trump phenomenon is that, and you see this even in the discussion of Herschel Walker this week, there's a lot of conservative defense of someone who is reportedly has a large track record in history that wouldn't be traditionally lined up with conservative behavior or concerns. Let's try to put it nicely. And Trump has always been the same way. And the things that Trump pushed policy-wise as a president, don't strike me as being particularly Christian. He obviously he's never read the Bible, has no idea what he's talking about. He waved it around once or twice. Yet the conservative Christians flocked to him earlier almost than anybody, them in the NRA. And he had a spotty track record on gun rights too. And so, was he a vessel for increased amount of Christian policy? The biggest one you could point to, and it's an important one, is how the Supreme Court decided on the Dobbs case.
Well, just his
is that a
appointments,
question
Matt?
Of Christian nationalism? I don't know if that's how I would describe it. So I guess I'm less concerned, or I'm less persuaded that the thing that we're seeing on the right is described best that way with a set of goals like that. It very well might be. I'm slow to recognize.
Well, I feel like the best piece of evidence for the argument is that Trump appointed those three justices who are voting on policy that those folks want, Christian nationalists. And most importantly, is now actually playing out in the life of half of America's women. Like the policy, it's a Christian nationalist policy, abortion. The vast majority of people who are anti-abortion are religious or that way for religious reasons.
Well, here's the way of thinking about this.
Really specifically.
Why isn't abortion allowed in France for people who are 20 weeks pregnant, right? Why is the cutoff often in Europe around 15 weeks? Is it because of Christian nationalism? Maybe. I mean, France is a much more explicitly Catholic country than we are. It could be also that abortion politics is everywhere kind of a weird and difficult topic, and different interest groups get the whip hand for a while, and there's a backlash against it. I think it's a difficult topic. I'm not convinced. Not to say that it's wrong, but I'm just not convinced that the reason why the justices voted the way they did was their own sense of or adherence to Christian nationalism. I don't know if Brett Kavanaugh wakes up in the morning as a Christian nationalist. It's kind of hard to imagine old Kagerstand that way, but it's possible. It's entirely possible. I just don't. Dobbs and abortion is a gigantic gigantic thing. And it immediately led to the degradation of rights of a ton of people. It immediately led to people having behavior criminalized that should never be criminalized. And it's led to a political backlash as well. I'm not minimizing that at all. What I'm saying is that what is the next Christian nationalism? Are we going to undo gay marriage? Are we going to undo gay adoption? I don't think so. I mean, it's...
But there's a movement. You're probably right in that we won't, but there's a huge movement towards it. I mean, Clarence Thomas suggested it. What about banning contraception, or even have a conversation about contraception or certain books? I mean, all of this is part and parcel of what I'm saying, what I'm afraid of, what the danger of Christian nationalism, our brand of authoritarianism, our brand of fascism, whatever. Yeah, I know you don't like certain words, but like, to me, they all point to the same dangers, I guess.
I think
or concerns.
Let's grant all of that for the sake of discussion.
Thank you.
A thing that, I mean, I'm not granting it, but just for the sake of discussion.
What if I won?
But like, so then the question is, what are the mechanics of doing this? Because one of the issues, the problems with either Christian nationalism or the new national conservatism, which is the thing I'm probably more animated about, because that is a Trumpy but post-Trump intellectual movement that's trying to coalesce and being very self-conscious about it. It apes Viktor Orban in Hungary.
I want to hear your thoughts on that. Finish your point, and then if you want to tell me what that is and who those people are and what you're concerned about.
Well, I'm concerned about many things about them, not least of which is that they are openly hostile to liberalism, as in the Enlightenment. And when people are walking around saying the Enlightenment sucks, I think you take them at their word and you agree that they suck. And
who are they? Are they commentators, policymakers, activists?
Yeah, I mean, all of the above. They're politicians. Josh Hawley would love to be their king leader. Ron DeSantis is increasingly going in that direction because he sees which way the wind is blowing on these issues. They want to use state power, the power of government, to punish their enemies, real and perceived, to go after companies. And this is and individual citizens. They want to use it, as you mentioned, to restrict access to books in various places, to restrict the ability of school teachers to have normal conversations. There's all kinds of stuff that I just have long been opposed to. What they are going to find out, and this is a little bit of optimism for you, who are in many ways probably more worried about aspects of that, is that shit's never going to be popular. That's their problem. They want to have on the intellectual and law side of this. So Rob Amari, the sort of the journalistic side, and what's the name of the magazine? American Compass or something like that, or just Compass. He sort of teases this out on the legal side. It's Adrian Vermeule, a professor, I believe, at Harvard, who's like trying to come up with new interpretations of the Constitution that would allow his vision of a very strong federal leader to channel the people's will. He'll use this kind of language, and this is one step away removed from intellectual justifications for fascism in the 1930s. So I use the word. But the problem is they imagine themselves to be channeling the real popular will, and all of their most treasured policies are actually unpopular. We don't want abortion bans in this country of people that are under 15 weeks. They're unpopular. Look at Kansas. Didn't work out. There's not going to be a popular movement away from gay marriage and gay adoption. They're fucking around right now, and pretty soon they're going to find out because the people who champion those policies are going to lose. They have the potential of squandering away a gimme retake of the Senate and even a gimme retake of the House by nominating a bunch of crazy people who are not only election deniers about Trump, but who have pretty extreme views on some of these issues. And they're going to find out that there is a middle in this country, and the middle doesn't want some newly unshackled, emboldened Christian nationalists anywhere near what they're doing.
I want to agree with that. I think it might be right, but my concern is that the reason you're not is because I used to say similar things and then shake out far worse. I'm like, it's not going to be that bad.
Agree.
Specifically, you and I remember covering, I think it was the midterms. I think it was 2012, but it was during Obama's presidency. And there were certain people running for Senate who said, you know, women should do this or that about the pill. But do you remember, like, the idea of rape or incest being allowed would have definitely gotten you run out of town as a Republican in a primary. Now they are winning. People who want to allow for rape and incest. And then more importantly, and I'm sure you have a lot of issues, everybody can be a fucking vigilante and go after an Uber driver. Like, these views are so extreme. I can't even believe we're talking about them. And yet here we are. And you're over here saying it's not going to get worse.
No, I'm not saying that. My actual, basically ever since I saw Donald Trump speak for the first time in July 2015, I've been blissfully immune to his charms all the way up to that point in my life. But I saw him speak at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas, and I wrote a piece, my reaction piece. It was called "The Idiocracy Candidate." I only mentioned that because it's a cliche, but I think I invented that cliche.
What year
for
was
him.
that?
July 2015. So it was right. It was It was 3 weeks after he escalated into our lives.
Yeah.
and I saw him speak, and it was an insane speech. It's just like he was just blurting out. I mean, we've come to know that that's how he talks. My misjudgment was that I thought that my fellow countrymen and women would, after being exposed to that, say, okay, nah, we're good. That's fine. And that's not where it went. And that has upended my whole sense of predicting anything. I presume that things are going to continue to get worse. My worse is going to be differently defined than your worse. I think it's bad that the federal government has been spending $7 trillion a year. I wrote a big critique of Trump on those lines, even before the pandemic came around, attacking him on, what should have been traditional kind of conservative values, of which he's terrible. But there's all kinds of things that are bad. And I think a populist cycle degrades and gets worse until it doesn't. And I don't see any obvious doesn't at the moment for a lot of different reasons. One reason is that populism is self-reinforcing, especially in a two-party system. There's people will learn the mirror image of the stuff on the bad actors on the other side, and will seek to, in their own way, justify changing their behavior in a negative way in order to defeat the monster. It's just going to be Lincoln Projects all the way down, and I don't like that.
Okay. This has been great. So much more I want to talk to you about politics and all of this, but here at the end, here we are. There are two more issues I wanted to talk to you about. I don't know if you have time, but I'd love to hear your take on both Loretta Lynn and home runs. Do you have time for both?
Sure.
Okay.
Loretta Lynn is a great goddamn American, and God rest her soul. She lived a very long and rich and fulsome life, and was the queen, and performing well into her 80s, and being just as great and interesting. And I'm glad that she lived to a robust age, and deserves our respect and credit. And please, if you haven't gone and check her stuff out, just tell your available streaming service, whatever it is, to shuffle songs by Loretta Lynn, and you're going to have yourself a nice day. As my feeling,
very nice.
Is what I have to say about that. And home runs are great.
What are your just because I'm interested in the controversy over steroids and non-steroid home runs. Is that what your rant is in support of or in criticism of?
I don't really have a rant to say. I'm happy that Aaron Judge broke the American League record yesterday and got to 62 home runs, just because he seems like a very nice guy. I like him. He's such a sweet little smile.
People like him. Yeah.
He's very handsome. And that's fine. I think it's silly to say, well, that's now the real record because of Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire and Barry Bonds were on roids. And so therefore those are invalid.
Allegedly in Barry Bonds' case, I learned. I
mean, yeah, very much so. But Barry Bonds, I believe he probably did. But also, he never failed a drug test.
Right.
And the only reason we know anything about him at all is because there were illegal leaks of compelled grand jury testimony. Right. The idea of grand juries are supposed to be we can basically remove the Fifth Amendment protection for self-incrimination because we know these proceedings are going to be secret. and they were secret for a minute and a half until it got in the hand of a San Francisco Chronicle reporter, and then everyone, the clear and the cream became everything. The U.S. government conducted what I believe to be a very shameful witch hunt against Barry Bonds and people associated with the Balco laboratory in the Bay Area. There was a single IRS agent or DEA agent, I forget, named Jeff Nowitzki, who basically was a frustrated former athlete himself and was working out in the gym and saw Barry Bonds on the TV. And he's like, damn, that guy must be cheating. I'm going to go after him.
Wow. I don't know anything about
if you look at the people who were served jail time for Balco, right? We're going after the big fish, the Balco, the laboratories. They're the big time. They weren't the people. The person who served the most jail time was Barry Bonds' personal assistant and trainer, because he refused to testify. We threw the man in jail because he said, no, I won't respond to your compulsory grand jury summons. And like, cool, you're going to go to jail then. So that's what we did.
And do you think Barry Bonds paid him for the rest of his life for keeping that quiet?
I do. I absolutely do. No, a thing that is also poorly understood, because people forever are misunderstanding baseball statistics, is that home run records fall in years or in eras with sudden increases in expansion teams. Roger Maris broke the record in 1961. What else happened in 1961? The league expanded by 2 teams, the Los Angeles Angels and the then Washington Senators, soon to be Minnesota Twins. I think I'm getting that right. Or they moved, whatever. There was the other team, or soon to be Texas Rangers. Sorry, Washington. And so what happens is you suddenly get 10 new pitchers, 20 new pitchers in the league who suck, and people fatten up. So big spike years for offense and home runs, 1961, also 1977. Turns out, when we added 2 new teams, 1993 when we added more teams, and 1998. And at the same time, in the 90s in particular, we were getting rid of those 60s and 70s era cavernous AstroTurf ballparks like the Astrodome and Riverfront Stadium and all these kind of things. They were all replaced by these twee little bandboxes everywhere, with the exception of maybe Petco
smaller stadiums with the shorter fields, so home runs are more likely.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So you had that combination, and people were weight training like crazy. Not least of which are pitchers. I think pitchers.
I know. Meanwhile, Maris and Mantle are smoking during the game and drinking beers, and that whole era.
Greenies. I mean, the smoking and drinking doesn't help your performance, but greenies sure the hell did, and those were everywhere. They were ways to have you fight through your hangover, but taking stimulants, and they were completely widespread. All you got to do is read Ball 4 by Jim Bouton, talking about the widespread use of that stuff back in the day. And so, yes, I think steroids played a role, but what do steroids do? They allow you to recover faster from a workout. Some steroids are perfectly legal. If they had been prescribed, that all would have been legal. It wasn't against the rules of Major League Baseball at that time. I think that Barry Bonds should be in the Hall of Fame, and Roger Clemens, and I don't know about Sammy Sosa, but Mark McGwire. And I think it's pretty silly the way that we've moralized about this kind of stuff. But I know in saying all this that I just made 1,000 enemies, and I'm sorry about that.
That investigator, I looked him up while you were talking about Nowitzki. He wrote an opinion piece for the New York Times saying that Bonds and McGwire should be in Cooperstown. How about that?
Did he really?
Yeah, I just searching him. I just saw that.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. That's not where his headspace was at. I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, back when I was
I'm sure there's some nuance in the piece. Did you know, by the way, I've been on steroids for hair loss for 25 years.
How's it working?
I mean, if I weren't taking them, I would have an afro.
Yeah. So your balls are the size of marbles. That's fine.
That's true, actually. But that's nothing to do with anything, because I'm not actually taking any drugs. I just do, in fact, have abnormally small testicles, which is not an issue.
It's fine.
Yeah, they work. And
Michael Stipe, large testicles. So I think.
Oh, really?
2 ships passing the night.
Yeah. Sorry to hear that. Matt, sorry I ended it that way, but I really appreciate you joining me for a 99.9% really thoughtful intellectual conversation before I brought up my balls.
Yeah. Yep. That's all well good. Thank you. It's wonderful to be back with you. And I always love to see your shed, and the natural lighting in your shed. I think about your shed as a metaphorical and and also actual construct, and it's a beautiful thing.
Thank you for painting the picture. The Fifth Element is the podcast. Anything else I should be plugging that you want to mention on air? Anything coming up or anything else for people to read?
Follow me at Twitter at Matt Welch. It's the Fifth Column podcast. Damn you, Pete Dominic.
What did I just say?
And you've got Fifth Element. It's
I keep
fine.
saying that. I said it many times.
That's fine. It's fine.
Why do I do that?
Movie.
What is the Fifth Element?
It's a great movie.
Is that
from
it? Is that
90s.
all it is? That Bruce Willis movie?
Cinquième Element.
Shit, the Fifth Column. I said it. I'll have to go back and edit that.
To the designs, it's a good movie. I'm happy to support that movie and all of its glory and weirdness. And Reason magazines remains my primary employer. Reason.com. Go check me out.
There you go, everybody. Thank you as always, man. I appreciate it. The Fifth Column, everybody. Stop getting it wrong, idiots, disrespectful losers. All right, there you go, Matt Welch, everybody. At Matt Welch, go read Reason Magazine if you'd like. Go listen to the podcast, which I really enjoy, the Fifth Column. They have a great community over there. Well, actually, I don't know if they have a great community. I just know that podcast is doing very, very well. Check them out. I don't know that much about it, but I know Matt a lot and love Matt. Michael Moynihan and Camille Foster are the three co-hosts over there. It's an interesting podcast every week. And that's all I've got for you on today's show. So thank you very much for joining me. I hope that Pete Coe feels better and joins us tomorrow night, or rather tonight at the Hangout. It'll be tonight at 8 East. And if you haven't signed up to subscribe with a paid subscription, then do it now and join us at the Hangout. We'd love to see you there. Check it out right now, standupwithpete.com. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic. You can always pay more than the $5 if you're already a subscriber to help sustain this podcast, which I'm doing every day. And let me know who you'd like to hear on it. And if you want to join the street team to help produce and promote the show, just email us, standupwithpete@gmail.com. All right, check out youtube.com/standupwithpete too. We're posting a lot of clips over there, videos from the interviews. Barry Hummel, Matt Carlson, Tina Winstead, all working really hard to make that happen. We need more support and help on pulling clips, so if you're interested, definitely email me. All right, that's it. I'm done. John Carroll singing us out. Love you. Bye-bye.
Off of your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience. Look, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.